Hello there. Well, President Zelensky has arrived at the Munich security conference. There was some news from Downing Street earlier saying that apparently Sir Keir Starmer and Volodymyr Zelensky have had a conversation. Brilliant. That's it. Problem solved. Everything's going to be OK. Let's talk now to Colonel Simon Diggins, a brilliant military and defence analyst. Simon, great to have you back on the programme. Let's unpack what's going on here, because we know that Donald Trump has had a conversation with Vladimir Putin. Well, my personal opinion is someone has to speak to him, you know, more George or less war and all of that. But people are up in arms over in Munich about what might have been said. There seems to have been a bit of backtracking from America over whether or not Ukraine can join NATO. What's your take on all of this?
I think what we've had, Alex, and very nice to talk to you as well, is a real dose of realism. After what has up until now been a significant amount of kind of, I won't quite call it fantasy, but kind of delusional aspirations to what's going to go on. I think for a while, certainly since the failure of the Ukraine counteroffensive in 2023, it's been obvious that Ukraine cannot take back the territories which it's lost to Russia since 2014, let alone the stuff that was taken from 2022 onwards. So that's been one of the issues there. And the aspirations towards NATO was never realistic while there was a war going on. I mean, it's actually written in NATO's rules that you can't have a member state joining, if they've got disputed borders and or ongoing conflict. So we've had this sort of delusional thinking and speaking by some of our leadership. What Trump has done is come along, and his words are brutal, and his rhetoric is awful, and it offends a lot of people. But he's actually basically introduced a dose of realism. And I have to be honest with you, it's not something we haven't heard before. You know, the Americans have actually been saying the same things to us for a while now, but a little bit more politely. Trump isn't polite, and I think that's what it's upsetting people. But actually, he's telling people the reality.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm so glad you've said that, because I totally agree. It's really ticking me off hearing people standing at that Munich summit saying, oh, well, talking to him is only validating him as a world leader. And, you know, they don't want to have any sort of dialogue. And then they're saying, please, America, please, can you give us weapons? But then Europe says, well, you know, if we allow our own Storm Shadow missiles to be used or this, that and the other, it might provoke him too much. Europe has been all over the place from the beginning about this, on what level of sanctions to apply because they were too intertwined economically with Russia, to what sort of level of weaponry could be given to Ukraine. And they beg America to come along and sort it out because they can't do it themselves. And as soon as America says, right, this is the reality of the situation, they say, no, you're doing it wrong. Macron went and sat around that big white table thinking he was, you know, the big boy in town, ironically. And that was all fine and good. But the minute it's Donald Trump having that conversation, it's terrible. Now, I remember when this war first broke out, the golden phrase that I kept hearing all the time from every single analyst was, two things. Number one, you back Putin in the corner, he's like a rat, a cornered rat. I kept hearing that, if you back him into cornered rat, he's just going to lash out. And the second thing I kept hearing being mentioned was, you've got to build him a golden bridge. Well, surely this is what's going on now.
Yeah, no, I think exactly what's going on. There's a way out, and it's not a comfortable way out. I mean, there's no question about who's in the right and who's in the wrong about this. You know, and Putin's conducted this offensive against Ukraine. But what we've been able to demonstrate for Ukraine is actually your sovereignty is intact, and that's what needs to happen. The territorial borders is painful, but actually that might not be it. But you're absolutely right about the general mood and tenor of the whole thing. Interestingly, Mark Rutte, who's the Secretary General of NATO, and his opening conversation with J.D. Vance this morning, he said Europe needs to grow up, and I thought, well, that was really good words and strong words and important to him, because I think that's what's going on. And another commentator said, you know, the U.S. security umbrella is in the process of being folded away. You know, basically, we now need to look after our own defence, and that will be difficult for some people to understand, but actually that is the reality.
And I wonder where the Ukrainians are at right now themselves, because I would imagine a fair number of people in Ukraine want this to be over. They don't want to live in perpetual war, in perma-crisis, destroying their economy, killing their loved ones. They want to get back to normal. And if that means sacrificing, let's say, the Donbass, which has been a contested region for a very long time, I'd imagine a vast number of Ukrainians might say, OK, I'm happy with that. The thing that concerns me, though, and I think this is where, you know, getting into the nitty-gritty of geopolitics, where we need to be alive to what Putin's longer game might be, is whether or not he's going to get any more significant coastal territory. He's got Crimea, but what we've seen as a result of this invasion of Ukraine is the wargaming of fertilizer supply, food supply, creating global inflation, the sort of trying to secure maritime bases when you've got Russia controlling the Black Sea, Iran, the Red Sea via the Houthi rebels, South Africa's going crazy. You know, we know that China's trying to pick up all sorts of ports and create their own atolls and islands to control maritime routes. And I think we'd be playing very much into the anti-Western axis hands if we say to Putin, OK, you can get all of this coastal region.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about the sort of geopolitical ambitions, and they're slow burn. I mean, one thing that the Russians and Chinese are very good at is kind of taking a strategic long-term view. But in terms of preventing the kind of that seizure of the Black Sea, it goes back to, well, the one thing that Zelensky actually has been very clear about is that if there's going to be some kind of peace settlement, then there needs to be, and he called it a strategic non-nuclear deterrent. In other words, their defences and their resources need to be built up to the point whereby Russia will not decide to go back and have a second bite of it after a ceasefire. So along with looking after our own defences, you know, the key to it, if we're going to be responsible European defence leaders and ensure that the security of our own continent, you know, is that we ensure that Ukraine has the resources so that Russia doesn't just use the ceasefire as an opportunity to rest, recuperate, build itself up again, and then go back for a second bite of the cherry. So there's a clear imperative there as well to continue to support Ukraine and develop and build up its own, as you said, a strategic non-nuclear deterrent to deter further aggression.
I mean, what would that look like? Because the big sort of heave-ho has been about whether Ukraine would join NATO. And as you said, it's for the birds at the moment when you've already got a war situation. But also, and this is quite clear, if you're going to get Putin to say, OK, I'm going to pull out of Ukraine, I'm going to negotiate some sort of a truce, his red line is going to be Ukraine cannot join NATO. He's never going to agree to it. I'm certain of that. He's made that very clear. He's made that plain. He's often voiced the fact that he thinks NATO is an aggressive expansionist bloc right on his doorstep. So how would it look then? Let's say that Europe has to now, you know, get together and be part of the defence of Ukraine after any sort of settlement. America says we're not going to put boots on the ground. Perhaps they might supply some sort of, you know, intelligence or weaponry. Perhaps they might even deploy troops there. But how might that look in terms of the funding of our armed forces, and which countries are going to agree to that?
No, I mean, there's, as I said, a huge amount of detail there. But some of the sort of the parts of that program, again, were discussed by President Zelensky when he spoke to European Union last year. He talked in terms, for example, of the Taurus missile, which the Germans have got, which is a long-range missile and very effective. He also talked about acquiring the next generation of the Storm Shadow missile, which the UK has got, in sufficient numbers to provide deterrence. And that whole issue around the communications, intelligence, all those other kind of things, which are not necessarily obvious bits of an effective military, have to continue and continue to be part of it as well. So that's part of the equation for the future in terms of equipment.
And but in terms of the political will, because one thing that seems to have torn many European countries apart when it comes to actually acting decisively against Russia, we really don't have much of it at all in the UK. I'd say the vast majority of voters go along with the sort of cross-party consensus that we should help Ukraine. But that isn't the situation in Germany. That isn't really the position of voters there. So which countries might be willing to say, OK, we're prepared to have our troops stationed in Ukraine, you know, subsection of our troops stationed in Ukraine for a medium term to make sure that things don't kick off again? No,
and it is unfortunately unclear. They'll be very reluctant to put forces in what they see potentially as harm's way. There is a leadership role for the UK there. If the UK is prepared to deploy troops to there, then I think others will follow. Now, whether they go into the front line, into the kind of the actual ceasefire guarding line, I think that may be more problematic. Russia's talked already about neutral countries doing that. And it may well be, I mean, this may be slight speculation, but the recent sort of conversations between Trump and President Modi of India may be part of that. So a neutral country that Russia can work with as on the sort of ceasefire line, but then behind the Europeans providing training, logistics, and also these key weapon systems that would give the Ukrainians a sense that they have got some form of deterrent against further Russian aggression. But it's not what sort of peace is there is actually may well determine who is prepared to support and who's not. If it's just a kind of rather bloody ceasefire, then the chance of putting sort of interpositional forces there is probably limited. If it's a more general ceasefire, then I think that the chance of it coming up is greater. So there's quite a lot to play for at the moment about where and how that happens.
Oh, Simon, it's been fantastic listening to you explain all of that, and it's brilliant to actually hear someone being pragmatic and honest about the situation we face, rather than having sort of Trump delusional syndrome, whatever it's called, Trump derangement syndrome. Colonel Simon Diggins, military and defence analyst, brilliant.